Betrayal has a scent. In my case, it was the unmistakable aroma of Hermes perfume, a fragrance my wife never wore but clung to a $500 silk scarf hidden in her drawer. The moment I held that scarf, something cold and sharp twisted inside me, a visceral pain that no courtroom battle had ever prepared me for. 15 years defending hospitals had taught me to recognize evidence, and this evidence was damning. My wife Rachel was being pursued by another man. In that moment, I didn't know which cut deeper, the betrayal itself or the realization that our seemingly perfect marriage was built on silence and secrets. My name's Ethan Burns. I've spent 15 years as a medical attorney in Portland, defending hospitals and clinics against malpractice suits. I know the healthcare system inside and out, both its healing miracles and its darkest corners. My wife Rachel is a talented nurse who landed a position at the prestigious Westwood Medical 5 years ago. We met when I was consulting for the hospital where she was interning. Her dedication to patients and quiet professionalism captivated me from day one. At Westwood, Rachel worked under Dr. Robert Wilson, a surgeon with an impeccable reputation whose practice brought in millions annually. Initially, she was starstruck, brilliant diagnostician, compassionate with patients, outstanding mentor. Wilson was a local celebrity, his face plastered across clinic billboards, his innovative treatment methods regularly featured in local publications. He sat on the state medical board, chaired charity galas, and had a wing of the hospital named after his family. In Portland's medical community, Wilson was untouchable royalty. Our life hummed along predictably until Rachel came home one evening with a box wrapped in elegant paper. "What's that?" I asked as she placed it on our kitchen table. "Just a gift from a grateful patient," she answered, but her eyes avoided mine. While she showered, I opened the box. Inside lay a Hermes silk scarf worth at least $500. Attached was a card reading, "For your special care, R.W." I knew enough about medical ethics to understand patients don't give such expensive gifts to nurses, and they certainly don't sign with initials. Over the following weeks, other gifts appeared: a bottle of rare wine, a gold bracelet, tickets to an exclusive wine tasting. Rachel kept insisting they were from patients, but I noticed changes in her behavior. Longer shifts, constant messages on her phone, nervousness when I asked about work. One evening, after Rachel returned particularly late, I checked her phone while she slept. What I saw turned my world upside down. "You look gorgeous today. Can't wait to see you again. Dreaming about our Napa trip, 2 days just you and me. This bracelet is as beautiful as you. Wear it when we're alone." There were dozens of messages, from flirtation to explicit propositions. No evidence Rachel reciprocated his feelings, but she certainly hadn't stopped him. My first instinct was confrontation. Make a scene with Wilson, report him to clinic management, force Rachel to quit. But as a lawyer, I knew where that would lead. Wilson would deny everything, use his influence to tarnish Rachel's reputation, accuse her of lying, or worse, of encouraging his attention. In the medical community, such scandals destroy careers, especially for nurses. So I decided to act differently, strategically, methodically. I would make him pay, but in a way he could never recover from. That night, lying next to my sleeping wife, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. This pompous doctor thought he could take my wife. I'd take everything from him instead. Rather than direct confrontation, I decided to dig deeper. After years defending medical institutions from lawsuits, I knew where to look for dirt. Wilson's clinic was among the most profitable in the region, which always raised questions. How could an ordinary surgical practice generate such revenues? I started with open sources, insurance payout statistics published annually. The data showed Westwood Medical received reimbursements for surgical procedures 64% higher than the regional average. Particularly interesting were bills for patients over 50 who had full insurance coverage. Getting actual patient information would be nearly impossible due to HIPAA privacy laws. As a medical attorney, I knew violating these could result in felony charges and disbarment. I needed a more sophisticated approach. I leveraged my professional network, reaching out to former colleagues now working at the state's Healthcare Quality Authority. Under the guise of academic research, I inquired about procedural volume statistics for outpatient surgical centers. The aggregated data confirmed my suspicions. Westwood performed an abnormally high number of joint surgeries, particularly on Medicare patients. These numbers are statistical outliers, my colleague James remarked, but they're technically within review thresholds. We've flagged them before, but Wilson's outcomes documentation is always impeccable. What about patient complaints? I asked casually. That's the strange part, James said. There are almost none. Either he's genuinely a miracle worker or the complaints never make it to your office, I finished. James nodded slowly. Wouldn't be the first time a prominent doctor had complaints buried. Wilson's connected to half the hospital board members in the state. This conversation gave me another angle to pursue. If complaints were being suppressed, there had to be a mechanism in place to intercept them. I began frequenting bars near the clinic where nurses and administrative staff often gathered. Introducing myself simply as Rachel's friend, I gradually initiated conversations to learn about the clinic's internal atmosphere. Dr. Wilson? Oh, he loves his successful operations statistics, said one receptionist after her third martini. What statistics? I innocently asked. Well, number of procedures performed, percentage of successful outcomes. He demands the figures increase every month, especially loves operating on elderly patients with good insurance. Another employee, a nurse from the administrative department, was even more forthcoming. Do you know how many diagnostic procedures we perform weekly? Twice as many as any other clinic in the city. Dr. Wilson calls it thorough diagnostics, but sometimes it seems we're just padding bills. One night, a medical assistant named Vanessa had clearly had too many drinks. She leaned in close, her breath heavy with gin. Between us, she whispered. I've seen Wilson change diagnostic results. Patient comes in with minor joint pain, somehow leaves with 3 scheduled surgeries. She laughed nervously. Man's a miracle worker, finds problems no other doctor can see. That's concerning, I said carefully. Concerning? It's brilliant. The clinic's bonuses are tied to procedure volume. We're all getting rich. She raised her glass. To Dr. Wilson's eagle eyes. But how does he get past the insurance reviews? I asked, genuinely curious. Insurance companies typically have strict verification processes. Oh, that's the clever part, Vanessa slurred. He's got this system where he documents subtle findings that technically qualify for intervention, but are impossible to disprove. Calls them Wilson's markers. And he's got his own imaging technicians who know exactly what to highlight in reports. Plus, she leaned even closer. Rumor has it his brother-in-law works at Blue Shield's review department. What about patient complaints? I asked, remembering James's comment. Vanessa's expression changed. Those disappear. Literally. There's a special protocol for any complaint against Wilson. They go straight to Patricia in patient relations. She's been his loyal gatekeeper for 15 years. Most complaints never make it into official records. And if patients persist, they get a personal call from Wilson. He can be, she hesitated, persuasive when necessary. I've heard him on these calls, starts compassionate, then gradually introduces doubt about their memory or understanding. By the end, they're apologizing to him. These conversations gave me leads, but I needed concrete evidence. Here, an old client and friend, Marcus, who worked at an insurance company serving many Westwood patients, helped me. Ethan, this is confidential, but we've been tracking Wilson's clinic for several months, Marcus said over lunch. Statistically, they have too many procedures per patient, especially for people over 50. But Wilson is so respected that nobody dares question it. What specifically concerns you? I asked. For instance, the number of knee arthroscopic surgeries. Wilson performs them twice as often as other surgeons. And the complication rate following these surgeries is also higher. Why hasn't your company investigated further? I pressed. Marcus sighed. Politics. Wilson sits on multiple boards. He plays golf with our CEO. And technically, all his paperwork is immaculate. We'd need overwhelming evidence to make a move against someone of his stature. What would constitute overwhelming evidence? I asked. Patient testimonies, documented pattern of unnecessary procedures, proof that his diagnoses were fabricated or exaggerated. Marcus hesitated. Look, there's something else. Our company actually tried to investigate 2 years ago. The executive who initiated it was suddenly transferred to our Alaska office. The message was clear. Wilson is untouchable. I asked Marcus to provide me with anonymized data for analysis, explaining that it was for academic research. A week later, I had 3 years of statistical data on my desk, showing a disturbing pattern, a clear correlation between patient insurance type and number of prescribed procedures. But this wasn't enough. I needed real cases, real people. That's when chance helped me. Playing golf at the club, I met George Parker, a 62-year-old former professor who recently underwent surgery at Westwood. Strangest thing, he related after our game. Went in with knee pain, came out scheduled for 3 surgeries. First an MRI, then arthroscopy, and 2 months later, complete joint replacement. Dr. Wilson said I had a rare form of cartilage degeneration. And how do you feel now, I asked. Honestly, worse than before the operations, but the doctor says that's normal and scheduled another procedure next month. Did you get a second opinion? I asked casually, lining up my putt. Wilson strongly advised against it, George replied, said it might compromise the treatment plan. But between us, I'm considering it. My physical therapist seems concerned. If you'd like a recommendation for another specialist, I offered, handing him my card, call me, no strings attached. George called 3 days later. The second opinion doctor was shocked at the aggressive treatment plan for what appeared to be routine osteoarthritis. Over the next few weeks, I found 7 more Wilson patients with similar stories. All over 50, all with full insurance coverage, all diagnosed with rare conditions requiring numerous surgical interventions. But the real breakthrough came from meeting Margaret Stillman, a 58-year-old former Wilson patient who was also a retired nurse. Something didn't add up, she said when we met at a cafe. My symptoms didn't match the diagnosis. So I requested copies of my MRI scans and showed them to a colleague at another hospital. Know what he said? There was nothing serious there. Just normal age-related wear. But Wilson insisted on surgery, claimed the risk was very high. Did you confront him? Tried to. He became aggressive, said I was questioning his professionalism, threatened to inform my insurance company I was refusing necessary treatment. Margaret agreed to provide me copies of her medical records and recordings of conversations with Wilson she had made for herself. I knew something was off, she explained. 30 years in nursing teaches you to trust your instincts. I recorded our conversations legally. Oregon is a one-party consent state. In one recording, Wilson's tone shifted dramatically when Margaret questioned the necessity of surgery. Mrs. Stillman, I'm the surgeon here. These subtle indicators in your scans indicate progressive joint deterioration that meets the criteria for intervention. If you refuse treatment and suffer mobility loss, your insurance may deny coverage for future treatments. Is that what you want? His voice wasn't concerned, it was threatening. What Margaret told me next was even more alarming. After she canceled her surgery, she received a letter from her insurance company questioning her decision and suggesting it might affect future coverage decisions. The letter mentioned expert medical opinion, Wilson's, regarding her condition. It felt coordinated, Margaret said, like Wilson had triggered some kind of protocol. I called the insurance company and spent hours getting transferred between departments. Eventually, a supervisor admitted they had received additional medical documentation from my doctor that raised concerns. This suggested Wilson's influence extended into insurance companies themselves, exactly the kind of systemic corruption I suspected. While building my case, I discovered something else troubling. Wilson wasn't working alone. After careful analysis of the clinic's billing patterns, I identified 3 other surgeons at Westwood with similar unusual statistics. The rabbit hole went deeper than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just one corrupt doctor, but potentially an institutional problem. I needed to understand how deep the corruption went. Through careful research, I mapped Wilson's connections, board positions, investments, professional relationships. A pattern emerged. Wilson had methodically positioned allies throughout the healthcare ecosystem, from insurance reviewers to hospital administrators to regulatory officials. Most concerning was his relationship with the state's medical review board chairman, Dr. Harold Jenkins. They'd been classmates at medical school, and Jenkins had helped quash two previous ethics investigations against Wilson. If I was going to build a case, I needed to find a way around this formidable defensive network. Gradually, the picture became clear. Wilson systematically diagnosed diseases that didn't exist, prescribed unnecessary procedures and surgeries, inflating bills to insurance companies, and increasing clinic profitability. And worst of all, he used his position to intimidate patients and staff, including my wife. With each passing day, my dossier on Wilson grew thicker. I had statistical data, former patient testimonies, conversation recordings. But I knew this wasn't enough for real action. The medical community is closed, doctors protect each other, and Wilson wielded enormous influence. I needed insider information, access to internal clinic documentation, medical records, correspondence. And here I had to make a difficult choice, involve Rachel. One evening when we were alone, I placed printouts of Wilson's messages before her. "Rachel, we need to talk," I said calmly. She cried immediately, but not from guilt, from relief. "I didn't know what to do," she said. At first it was just compliments, then small gifts. When I tried to establish boundaries, he hinted he could ruin my career. "He's the chief physician, Ethan. His word against mine." "Did he ever?" I couldn't finish the question. "No," she said firmly. "He tried, once. In his office after hours. I made it clear that would never happen." Her eyes met mine. "I swear, Ethan, I never encouraged him, but I was afraid to reject him outright." "Why didn't you tell me?" The hurt in my voice was unmistakable. "Because you'd confront him," she said softly, "and he'd destroy us both. You don't know how powerful he is in the medical community. He's ended careers over less." I showed her the evidence I'd gathered. "Rachel, this is more than just harassment. He's using his position for abuse, both with you and with patients, and I'm going to stop him." She stared at the files, her nurse's eye quickly assessing what she was seeing. "These surgeries, they're completely unnecessary. These patients didn't need half these procedures." "Exactly, and I need your help to prove it." Initially afraid, after seeing the scale of evidence, Rachel agreed to help. She had access to the electronic medical record system and could legally review records of patients she worked with. "I can't just copy records," she explained. "That's a confidentiality breach. But I can note cases that match the pattern you've identified." To protect Rachel legally, I consulted with a specialist in healthcare whistleblower law. He advised a careful approach. Rachel could document patterns and discrepancies she observed in her normal workflow, but couldn't actively search for cases or access records she wasn't authorized to see. "The key is working within her professional responsibilities," the attorney explained. "As a nurse, she has both the right and ethical obligation to note potentially harmful patient care practices. Just don't take any physical records from the facility." We set up a secure system. Rachel would make mental notes during her shifts, then record her observations in a password-protected document at home, using patient identifiers that couldn't be traced back to specific individuals. This approach protected both patient privacy and Rachel's legal position. Over the next 2 months, we carefully built our case. Rachel flagged suspicious cases for me, patients diagnosed with rare diseases without sufficient grounds, unnecessary procedures, inflated bills. I contacted these patients after discharge, introducing myself as a lawyer researching medical insurance cases. One night, Rachel came home visibly shaken. "Wilson scheduled 3 knee replacements today, all Medicare patients, all with minimal arthritic changes." She handed me a small notebook. "I've been keeping notes, dates, patient identifiers, discrepancies between symptoms and diagnoses. This is extremely helpful, but also dangerous," I warned. "If Wilson suspects—" "He already does," she interrupted. "He's watching me. Asked why I was reviewing certain patient files. Said I should focus on my assigned duties." She took a deep breath. "There's more. Wilson called an emergency staff meeting yesterday. Said there were troubling rumors about the practice and reminded everyone about confidentiality agreements. He specifically mentioned legal consequences for defamation." "He's getting nervous," I noted. "Good. Not good, Ethan. He's dangerous when cornered." The next day, Rachel received an unexpected promotion offer. transfer to the administrative team with a 40% salary increase. The position would remove her from direct patient care and require signing an enhanced confidentiality agreement. It's a bribe, I said when she told me, and a way to isolate you from patient information. What should I do? She asked. Accept it, I said after careful consideration, but insist on a 2-week transition period to train your replacement. That gives us time to gather final evidence before you're moved. Rachel's promotion provided an unexpected advantage. Her new administrative role gave her legitimate access to insurance claim data. She discovered that Westwood was coding procedures to maximize reimbursement, often misrepresenting the complexity of surgeries to increase payments. That same week, Rachel overheard Wilson on the phone with someone at the state medical board, an old friend from medical school. They were laughing about overzealous regulators who don't understand modern medicine. The evidence base grew, but I understood medical records alone weren't enough. We needed an insider view of financial motives. Here, another contact helped me. Teresa Luis, former finance director of another clinic who consulted medical institutions on profit optimization. This is a classic scheme, she said, reviewing my data. Wilson isn't just prescribing unnecessary procedures. He's choosing the most expensive procedures with the highest insurance reimbursement. This works especially effectively with Medicare patients. Government insurance rarely challenges decisions from doctors of his caliber. Teresa helped me structure the financial evidence, showing how the clinic earned millions from fictitious diagnoses. As our investigation deepened, Wilson made his boldest move yet. I received a call from an unknown number while driving home. Mr. Burns, this is Robert Wilson. I think we should meet. I was surprised by his directness, but kept my composure. What about, Dr. Wilson? I believe we have mutual interests to discuss. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., the Reserve Club, private dining room. Curiosity overcame caution. I'll be there. I arrived early, wearing a discreet recording device, legal in Oregon with one-party consent. Wilson arrived precisely at 7, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Thank you for coming, he said, ordering scotch for himself. I'll be direct. I know you're investigating me. I remained silent, letting him continue. What you're doing is understandable. If someone pursued my wife, I might react similarly. He sipped his drink. But this has gone beyond personal matters. You're disrupting a successful medical practice and potentially harming patients who need care. Patients who need unnecessary surgeries? I asked. He smiled thinly. Medical opinions differ. What some call unnecessary, others call preventative or comprehensive. And the financial incentives for these comprehensive approaches? Healthcare is a business, Mr. Burns. You know this better than most. He placed a folder on the table. Inside is a consulting contract. 2 years, $1 million, helping us improve our compliance procedures. All we ask is you sign a standard non-disclosure agreement and cease your current academic research. You're offering me $1 million bribe, I stated flatly. I'm offering you a professional opportunity. Plus, he leaned forward, protection. Your career, your wife's career, they're vulnerable. You've made powerful enemies. This is a chance to turn adversaries into allies. And if I decline, his expression hardened, then we respond accordingly. Your law firm represents 3 hospital groups that generate significant revenue. I sit on all 3 boards. Your wife works in my clinic. Your house has a substantial mortgage. Your position is more precarious than you realize. I stood to leave. Thanks for making this easy, Dr. Wilson. You've just confirmed everything I suspected. His voice stopped me. Burns, this recording you're undoubtedly making won't help you. It's my word against yours, a respected surgeon versus a jealous husband with a vendetta. Think carefully about your next move. I left without responding, but Wilson's threat crystallized my resolve. The recording of his bribe attempt would be valuable, but he was right about one thing. I needed more than my word against his. As I was leaving Teresa's office the next day, my phone rang. It was my law firm's managing partner. Ethan, we need to talk, now. When I arrived at the office, he wasn't alone. 2 members of the board sat with him, faces grim. We received a call from Dr. Wilson at Westwood Medical, my partner said without preamble. He claims you're conducting an unauthorized investigation into his practice, harassing his staff and violating HIPAA regulations. That's not true, I began. He's threatening to sue the firm, Ethan. Says he has evidence you've been collecting protected patient information. Is there any truth to this? Absolutely not, I said firmly. I've been researching billing anomalies in outpatient surgical centers for a potential journal article. All my data is anonymized and legally obtained. I didn't mention Rachel or my personal connection. The partners exchanged glances. Wilson specifically mentioned your wife works there, says you have a personal vendetta. My research is professional and ethical, I maintained. If Wilson is concerned, perhaps he should examine why. After a tense hour, I left with a warning. Distance myself from anything involving Westwood Medical or risk suspension. Wilson had made his first counterattack. It wouldn't be his last. That evening, Rachel received a call reassigning her to the geriatric ward, the least desirable position for a surgical nurse. When she questioned it, her supervisor merely said, "Doctor's orders." 2 days later, I discovered my credit score had mysteriously plummeted 150 points overnight. The credit bureau couldn't explain the sudden change but promised to investigate. Then George Parker called, sounding distressed. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but I can't help with your research anymore. Dr. Wilson personally called me, said my insurance might not cover my previous surgeries if I participate in any investigation. I can't risk it. I'm still paying off the first operations." Wilson was systematically cutting off my sources and applying pressure. But he'd underestimated me. I hadn't built a successful legal career by backing down from threats. My strategy shifted. If Wilson could leverage his network against me, I needed to build my own coalition. I reached out to a former law school classmate who now worked for the state attorney general's office, specializing in healthcare fraud. "This is bigger than one doctor," I explained, sharing my evidence. "It's systemic abuse affecting hundreds of patients, mostly elderly. What you're describing is concerning," she admitted, "but we'd need substantial evidence to take on someone of Wilson's stature." "I'm working on that," I assured her. "All I'm asking is that you be ready when I have it." Next, I contacted a journalist friend at the Oregonian who had previously covered healthcare fraud. Without naming Wilson, I outlined the general pattern I'd discovered. "If this pans out, it's Pulitzer material," he just said, "but I'd need rock-solid documentation." "When the time comes," I promised, "you'll have everything you need." Finally, I reached out to patient advocacy groups focused on elder care and Medicare rights. Their perspective added a crucial dimension to my understanding. Wilson's practices weren't just unethical, but part of a broader pattern of exploitation targeting vulnerable populations. When my dossier became convincing enough, I faced a dilemma: where to turn. Wilson had connections throughout the medical community. Hospital boards often turned blind eyes to such abuses to avoid scandals. After careful analysis, I decided to act on 3 fronts simultaneously. 1. The State Medical Licensing Commission. They had the power to revoke Wilson's license. 2. The Medicare Investigations Department. Since most victims were on federal insurance, this constituted federal crime. 3. The 3 largest insurance companies paying for clinic services. They had financial incentives to investigate fraud. I prepared 3 separate document packages, each adapted to its specific recipient. For the Licensing Commission, I emphasized violations of medical ethics and potential patient harm. For Medicare, financial abuses and fraud. For insurance companies, excessive reimbursement and procedure cost inflation. Before sending the documents, I took one final step, met with Margaret Stillman and 5 other former patients, convincing them to file official complaints. Their personal stories added a human dimension to the dry statistics. One Monday, ensuring all details were in place, I simultaneously sent all 3 document packages. Now all I could do was wait. The first reaction came from insurance companies. Within a week, they suspended all payments to Westwood and began their own investigation. This delivered an immediate financial blow to the clinic. 2 weeks later, the Medicare Investigations Department sent auditors to the clinic, who began examining all documentation for the past 5 years. News of the federal investigation reached local media, and the clinic's reputation began plummeting. Wilson tried to present this as a routine check and misunderstanding. But when patients began massively canceling appointments and doctors started seeking employment elsewhere, his confidence wavered. Then came his most desperate move. As I was driving home one evening, a black SUV pulled alongside me at a red light. The window rolled down, revealing Wilson himself in the passenger seat. "You've made a terrible mistake, Burns," he called out. "I'm offering you one chance to withdraw your allegations. Otherwise, I'll ensure neither you nor your wife works in this town again." I kept my eyes forward. "The evidence speaks for itself, Doctor. I suggest you get a good lawyer." His face contorted with rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've got friends in places you can't imagine. Back off now or you'll regret it." The light turned green and I drove away, but his threat lingered. That night, I installed security cameras around our house and advised Rachel to be extra cautious. 2 days later, I received an anonymous email containing documents from my law firm's confidential files, case notes from a malpractice suit I defended years ago where the patient died. The message was simple. How would the public feel knowing you helped this doctor escape justice? Back off, Wilson, or this goes public. It was a classic attempt at blackmail. The case in question had been settled legally and ethically, but context wouldn't matter in the court of public opinion. Still, I refused to be intimidated. Instead, I forwarded the email to the Medicare fraud investigators as evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Wilson had just added federal intimidation charges to his growing list of problems. Wilson's desperation took an even darker turn. 3 days after receiving the blackmail email, someone broke into our home while we were out. Nothing was stolen, but our personal files had been searched, and Rachel's computer was missing. The police suggested it was likely a targeted break-in, not a random burglary. "He's looking for your evidence," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "What if he finds the people we've talked to?" I had anticipated this. "All the original documents are in a secure location," I assured her, "and I've warned our witnesses to be vigilant." Nevertheless, I hired private security for Margaret Stillman and our other key witnesses. It was a precaution that proved prescient when Margaret reported a suspicious car parked outside her house the following night. The security guard photographed the driver, one of Wilson's clinic administrators. Rachel continued going to work, but noticed a sharp change in Wilson's behavior. He became irritable, avoided communication with staff, and spent long hours locked in his office. "He's destroying documents," she told me, "and he knows I suspect something. Today he asked if you were behind this investigation." I advised Rachel to take leave, but she refused. "If I disappear, he'll know we're involved. Better I stay and observe." One evening, Rachel came home early, her face pale. "Wilson cornered me in the medication room," she said, her voice shaking. "He said he knows we're behind the investigation. Said he has friends everywhere who'll make sure we never work again." "Did anyone witness this?" I asked, already reaching for my phone. "2 other nurses. They heard everything." She managed a small smile. "One of them, Diane, actually stepped between us, told Wilson his behavior could be considered threatening." "We need to report this immediately," I said. "Already did. Went straight to HR, filed a formal harassment complaint with Diane as witness." The next day, things escalated further. As I was entering the courthouse for an unrelated case, I was served with papers. Wilson was suing me for defamation, requesting $5 million damages. I laughed, which confused the process server. This was a desperate move. Discovery works both ways. The lawsuit would give me legal access to exactly the records I needed. I immediately filed a countersuit and motion for expedited discovery. My former partners, initially hesitant, now agreed to represent me pro bono. Wilson's intimidation tactics had backfired, turning former colleagues into allies. The lawsuit proved to be Wilson's greatest miscalculation. During deposition preparation, his own attorneys discovered the extent of his fraudulent practices. 1 week before depositions were scheduled to begin, they withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with the client regarding case strategy. With his legal team abandoning him and investigations accelerating, Wilson made one final desperate attempt to salvage his situation. Through an intermediary, he offered a settlement. He would drop the lawsuit, resign from practice, and leave the state in exchange for me withdrawing all complaints. "Not a chance," I told the intermediary. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about the hundreds of patients he harmed." The climax came a month after the investigation began. The Medical Licensing Commission called Wilson to a closed hearing. The next day, they temporarily suspended his license, pending clarification of circumstances. Wilson lost it. He called Rachel in the middle of the night, accusing her of betrayal, threatening revenge. We recorded the entire conversation and passed it to investigators as additional evidence of his unethical behavior. 3 days later, Rachel received an anonymous text. "You'll regret this. Nobody ruins Robert Wilson." We reported the threat to police, who took it seriously enough to increase patrols near our home. But Wilson's intimidation tactics backfired spectacularly. The threats became additional evidence in the growing case against him. The most shocking development came when Wilson's executive assistant contacted me directly. Apparently, she'd been documenting his unethical practices for years, fearing exactly this scenario. "I have a record of every patient he coerced into unnecessary procedures," she told me, and emails between him and the other doctors discussing their revenue enhancement strategies. They called it harvesting the Medicare field. When I asked why she was coming forward now, her answer was simple. "He threw me under the bus, told investigators I was responsible for the billing discrepancies. I've covered for him for years, but I won't take the fall." Her documentation proved to be the smoking gun, internal emails explicitly discussing how to maximize billing through unnecessary procedures. One particularly damning email from Wilson read, "Remember, every arthritic knee is potentially 3 procedures, not 1. Don't leave money on the table." The federal investigation lasted 6 months. During this time, auditors reviewed over 500 medical records and found systematic fraud. 73% of patients over 50 received diagnoses unsupported by symptoms. 68% of surgical procedures were medically unjustified. In 45% of cases, post-operative complications required additional procedures, also paid by insurance. The total fraudulent reimbursement exceeded $8 million over the last 3 years. The case reached federal court. Wilson faced charges of medical insurance fraud, medical record falsification, unethical medical practice, witness intimidation, and attempted blackmail. He faced up to 20 years imprisonment. Throughout the investigation, I discovered the full extent of Wilson's network. His influence reached into hospital administration, insurance companies, and even state regulatory bodies. He hadn't built just a fraudulent practice, but an entire ecosystem of corruption. 3 other doctors at Westwood were also charged, along with the clinic's financial officer and 2 administrators. The case expanded beyond Wilson to expose systemic problems in healthcare reimbursement. Under the weight of evidence, Wilson agreed to a plea deal, guilt admission, in exchange for 5 years imprisonment and damage reimbursement. His medical license was permanently revoked. Throughout the court proceedings, Wilson maintained his arrogance, telling reporters, "This is a miscarriage of justice. I'm being persecuted for practicing aggressive, cutting-edge medicine that most doctors are too conservative to embrace." But when former patients began testifying, elderly people describing how they'd been convinced to undergo painful, expensive, unnecessary surgeries, public opinion turned decisively against him. Margaret Stillman's testimony proved particularly damaging. "Dr. Wilson told me I would be in a wheelchair within 6 months without surgery. When I questioned the diagnosis, he suggested I was being irrationally fearful and asked if I was suffering from dementia. I was scared into a surgery I didn't need, which left me with chronic pain I'll have for the rest of my life." The Westwood Clinic didn't survive the scandal. 6 months later, it closed, and its assets were sold to compensate affected patients. On the day of Wilson's sentencing, the courtroom was packed with former patients. As he was led away in handcuffs, there was no applause, no celebration, just the quiet acknowledgement that justice, however delayed, had finally been served. But my battle wasn't over. Wilson had powerful friends who still occupied influential positions. In the months following his conviction, I faced a series of professional challenges: mysteriously lost clients, unexpected audits of my practice, speaking engagements suddenly canceled. "They're trying to isolate us," Rachel observed one evening. "Make an example of what happens when you challenge the system." She was right, but their tactics only strengthened my resolve. Each obstacle pushed me to dig deeper into the systemic issues that had allowed Wilson's fraud to flourish. I began working with state legislators to draft stronger healthcare fraud prevention measures. The Wilson Act, as it came to be known, established new protections for healthcare whistleblowers and stricter oversight of surgical practices with abnormal billing patterns. That evening, we sat in silence at our kitchen table. "It's really over," she said finally. "Yes," I agreed, "but for some of his patients, the consequences will last a lifetime." She reached for my hand. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner about the gifts, the messages, everything. You were scared. He had power over your career." "That's no excuse. I should have trusted you." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you for not giving up, for fighting for those patients, for me." "Always," I promised. "Always." After the clinic closed, Rachel found herself unemployed but with a clear conscience. Although not directly involved in Wilson's fraudulent schemes, the mere fact of working at the scandal-ridden clinic complicated finding a new position. We decided to use this situation as an opportunity for a fresh start. Throughout the investigation, I'd met many affected patients and seen how vulnerable they were to the medical system. "Rachel, what if we create something to help people navigate the medical system?" I proposed. "A consultation center that helps patients understand their diagnoses, evaluate procedure necessity, protect their rights." She liked the idea. Over the next months, we developed a business plan for Burns Patient Advocacy Center. I used my legal knowledge and Rachel her medical expertise to create a service that stood on patients' side. We faced immediate resistance. Our loan applications were mysteriously denied despite excellent credit. Potential office spaces suddenly became unavailable when landlords learned who we were. Local medical associations refused to collaborate with us. Wilson's network is still active, I realized. They're trying to shut us down before we start, but they'd underestimated our determination and resourcefulness. I reached out to the patients who testified against Wilson. Many had received substantial settlements and were eager to support our initiative. 5 of them became our founding investors. We also faced regulatory hurdles designed to hamper our operation. Medical licensing boards, still influenced by Wilson's former allies, questioned whether our advocacy center required special certification. Insurance networks initially refused to recognize our consultation services as reimbursable. I countered these obstacles by leveraging media attention. The Oregonian journalist I'd previously contacted published a series of articles titled "After Wilson, the Fight for Patient Rights," highlighting our struggle against entrenched interests. Public support surged, forcing regulatory bodies to back down. We started with a small office and limited budget, but Wilson's story attracted media attention, and soon people from across the state began contacting us. Margaret Stillman, Wilson's former patient, joined our team as a consultant. Within a year, our center helped over 200 patients avoid unnecessary procedures and save hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses. We also collaborated with insurance companies to identify other potential fraud schemes. Our work attracted attention beyond Oregon. I was invited to testify before a congressional committee on Medicare fraud. Rachel developed a training program for nurses to identify and report unethical medical practices. What began as a personal vendetta evolved into a mission. We weren't just fighting one corrupt doctor, but challenging an entire system that prioritized profit over patient welfare. The Wilson case became a landmark in healthcare fraud prosecution. Law schools included it in their ethics curriculum. Medical schools used it to teach about the boundaries of professional conduct. My name became associated with medical accountability, leading to invitations to speak at healthcare conferences nationwide. More importantly, our work began to change the culture of silence in medicine. Inspired by Rachel's example, other healthcare professionals began reporting suspected fraud and unnecessary procedures. Medical whistleblower cases increased 300% in the 2 years following Wilson's conviction. Rachel blossomed in her new role. For the first time in a long while, she felt her work had real impact. Our relationship, strained by the Wilson situation, became stronger than ever. One evening, 2 years after this all began, we sat on our house terrace watching the sunset. "You know, when this all started, I thought only about revenge," I said. "I wanted to destroy Wilson for trying to take you from me." "And now," Rachel asked, "now I understand it wasn't about him. It was about the system that allowed people like him to thrive. And we're changing that system one case at a time." Dr. Wilson served his sentence in federal prison, his reputation ruined, his career destroyed. But the real victory for me wasn't his downfall, but what we created from his ashes. An organization that protected the vulnerable and gave them voice. The morning after Wilson's sentencing, I received an unexpected call from George Parker, the former professor whose case had helped launch our investigation. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, "not just for stopping Wilson, but for what you're doing now. My sister just had a consultation at your center. The doctor had recommended back surgery, but your team helped her get a second opinion. Turns out she just needed physical therapy." "That's exactly why we created the center," I told him. "Well, it's making a difference. People need advocates when they're scared and vulnerable. You're saving lives, Mr. Burns." After I hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at the framed news clipping about Wilson's conviction that hung on my wall. I'd kept it as a reminder of why we started this work. But perhaps it was time to replace it with something else, something that looked forward, not back. I found Rachel in the conference room, coaching a new patient advocate we'd hired. "Remember," she was saying, "most patients don't know what questions to ask. Our job is to empower them, not make decisions for them." Watching her, confident and passionate, I felt a surge of pride. We had turned a personal betrayal into something that helped hundreds of people. Wilson had tried to steal my wife and had instead given us a mission. When I embraced Rachel that evening, I understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy, but creating something better from what they tried to ruin. And Wilson, he paid dearly, not just with years behind bars and millions in restitution, but with the knowledge that his crimes led to creating a system that wouldn't allow people like him to thrive again. That was the sweetest victory of all.